Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I am discussing the Inciting Incident. Before I get into that, though, you may have noticed a change in the audio quality, and that is because I am recording using my brand new microphone, which I got for Christmas, courtesy of my parents, which is so nice. Up until now, I had just been using my phone to record. I would just use the Voice Memos app. But now I'm recording directly on GarageBand, and it feels so much more professional having the fancy microphone all set up. It feels more like I'm doing a radio show. I'm really excited. I did a little bit of audio test recording beforehand, so it is still a bit of a learning curve for me since this is my first time recording the podcast using the microphone, but I'm very excited now having this new setup and this new and improved audio moving forward. And so going into this week's episode, I am talking about the Inciting Incident. And what is the Inciting Incident? It is the narrative event that launches the main action. It typically occurs within the first act of a story and means something significant for the main character, most likely impacting their entire life. It should also fully engage the reader with the story, serving as an indicator of what's to come. So I really first learned about the term inciting incident back when I was in college when I first started taking screenwriting courses. And essentially it is the call to action for the protagonist. It is the moment that sets the main character on the hero's journey, which is from Joseph Campbell describing the kind of structure for any given movie, where you have the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. And that gives us that pyramid shape for any given screenplay. And that's true of movies and also really of novels, because so many movies, of course, are adapted from novels, and they have that similar structure where within the first 10 minutes of a movie, it sets up the world, introduces us to the characters, and then the inciting incident happens that sets the character onto that hero's journey. So another way to describe it, this is from an article on the writepractice.com, and that's write as in WRITE. It's called Inciting Incident, Definition, Examples, Types, and How to Start a Story Right by Joe Bunting. And he says, the inciting incident is an event in a story that upsets the status quo and begins the story's movement, either in a positive way or negative, that culminates in the climax and denouement. And so any story has an inciting incident, but especially in shows, movies, books, plays, where you kind of establish a little bit of the world before the inciting incident happens. But sometimes it can happen right off the bat, honestly, where just something new happens to the character that sets them on their journey. And of course, with any story, it's about what the character wants and how they'll learn and grow from it and hopefully get what they want in the end, or at least just kind of learn about themselves and why we're telling this specific story. Because even with a short story, it just happens that much more quickly, though. But with a novel, there's, you could tell as long of a story as you want, similar with a movie. And with a TV show, too, you have the inciting incident really in any episode of TV, but especially in the pilot when you're establishing the characters and the tone of the show. And so in this article, it says, as Robert McKee says, the inciting incident radically upsets the balance of forces in your protagonist's life. And there are other ways to describe the actual term inciting incident. Another one is the call to adventure, which is from Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. Another is the catalyst from Dan Snyder's Save the Cat. And that's all about really kind of the structure of screenwriting, that book, and just kind of how the formula for it. That, again, it goes back to kind of that pyramid shape for a story. Another way to describe it is the hook, the problem, the exciting force, inciting event, inciting moment. So there's no really one right term, but to me, like, inciting incident is just the most universal way to describe it. And, of course, everything has its exceptions, because then if you rely so much on that all the time, like, okay, so first 10 pages, establishing the world, then the inciting incident, then, if you're so rigid with the rules, then it becomes formulaic. But that is more often than not the case for the vast majority of movies with the hero's journey. And, of course, with novels as well. And the whole point really is then it's hooking the audience or the reader and wanting to, why do they want to go on this journey? So that is the moment that is the in for the audience as well. And So also in this article, it says an event must have 5 criteria to be an inciting incident. So these are the 5 criteria. 1, early. A story's inciting incident occurs early in the story, sometimes in the first scene, almost always within the first 3 to 4 scenes. So again, of course, in the first act of a movie and the first several chapters of a novel. Number 2 is interruption. Inciting incidents are an interruption in the main character's normal life. So that can be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that the main character makes a decision that sets them on the journey. It can just be one of those sometimes even coincidental things, or something that just, if something happens to them, then they have no choice but to go on this journey and discover what they will find out about themselves or what they want to learn and how they're going to grow. Number 3 is out of the protagonist's control. Inciting incidents are not caused by the character and are not a result of the character's desires. So a perfect example that comes to mind to me is, I love talking about Pixar movies, so talking about Toy Story. When Andy gets a new toy, Buzz Lightyear, so that disrupts the status quo of Woody's life as Andy's favorite toy. And then all the jealousy that unfolds, and that movie's amazing. So that's kind of you could look at any movie and point out the inciting incident of what it is that kind of sets the story in motion, and why it is we're watching that story, why it is we're watching this movie, because this is the moment that takes us on this journey. And again, with books as well, and with plays, with short stories. I just kind of going back to movies specifically, though, because that's kind of the easiest examples to me. So anyway, number 4 is life-changing. The event must have higher than normal stakes and the potential to change the protagonist's life. Because again, it's all about, why are we watching this specific story? Why is it that the character is taking this journey now in their lives? And if it doesn't have any sort of effect on them, then there's really kind of no point to it at all. That we're not going to learn anything about the character, and the character won't learn anything about themselves. So if I stick with Toy Story, it's Woody coming to terms with the fact that he may not be, like him and Andy, that bond may not be forever, but making the most of it now. And that there's no reason for him to be jealous, because Buzz Lightyear's a great toy too, and they form their own friendship. So then he learns to let go of his jealousy and know that what's important is being there for Andy for as long as is possible for them, even with him growing up, knowing that it won't be forever. And number 5 is urgent. Inciting incidents necessitate an urgent response. So if I stick with that example, it's, oh no, a new toy, like he's gonna be the more popular one. He's got to have as in Woody has to kind of prove that he is still the leader, and how that kind of backfires on him when they think that he like killed Buzz like out the window, so then where the inciting incident fits into a dramatic structure. We have exposition, as I said, which is establishing the world, introducing us to the characters. The inciting incident, then the rising action or progressive complications, the dilemma or crisis, then the climax, and the denouement, which leads to the resolution. So, sticking with this article from The Right Practice, he goes on to talk about 6 core values that come into conflict in stories and mapped out for any given story. So they are action-adventure story, life versus death; mystery, thriller, horror story, life versus a fate worse than death; love story, love versus hate; performance or sports story, accomplishment versus failure; coming of age story, maturity versus naivety; and morality story, good versus evil. And then he also describes the 10 types of inciting incidents. So number 1 is the call to adventure / death plus MacGuffin, which is the action-adventure story's life versus death. And typically there is a victim, a mentor, and a villain. The next example is death of a loved one, or a great crime against me. That is an action-adventure story's life versus death. The third example is show me the body, mystery, crime, thriller, horror story, life versus a fate worse than death. Next is the haunted house or forbidden object, mystery, crime, thriller, horror story, life versus a fate worse than death again. Next is meet cute, love story, love versus hate. So there's so many. And that's just when the couple first meet. So even if you look at, honestly, Disney movies too, like Aladdin and Jasmine, when they meet. So my favorite Disney movie. And an example he lists here is The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks. I have to say, on a side note, that is an extremely rare instance where I prefer the movie over the book. I really do. That movie is far superior to the book, in my opinion. But in that movie, it's of course when Allie and Noah meet. Another example is the classic play by Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, when Romeo and Juliet meet. So any and every rom-com where the couple first meets, you have the meet cute. That's a classic trope, but that's called a meet cute for a reason, because usually one of them makes a fool out of themselves, and it's adorable. It's very endearing. Number 6 is betrayal, love story, love versus hate. The next is the tournament, performance or sports story, accomplishment versus failure. The next is here there be oh my god, this is because I'm watching Yu-Gi-Oh! But Dragons. My mind goes to Seto Kaiba. Anyway, coming of age story, maturity versus naivety. Jesus. Goodness, I didn't mean to throw myself off like that. But anyway, number 9, principal's office, coming of age story, maturity versus naivety. I'm just kind of listing them out, but he goes more into depth, like giving more examples for each of them. And one example he lists for this one specifically is The Breakfast Club. When they are all, when we're each introduced to each character sitting there in not after school, in Saturday detention. And I talked about that movie before, an absolute classic 80s film. Number 10 is The Temptation, morality story, good versus evil. And the last thing he talks about in this article is the inciting incident is simple. Just throw rocks. Whenever the idea of trying to tell a story gets too complicated, I come back to this one simple piece of writing advice that's over 100 years old. You might have heard of it. It goes, in the first act, put your character up a tree. In the second act, throw rocks at them. In the third act, bring them down. That's it. That's all you have to do. Just put your character up a tree so they can be an easy target for rocks. It's not complicated. Don't get overwhelmed by all of the different types of inciting incidents or the terminology. Just figure out how to put your character up a tree so that you can start throwing rocks. Not too hard, right? So, and then he kind of gives an example. So, to practice, choose one of the types of inciting incidents above, then in one sentence outline it for a story. Finally, set a timer for 15 minutes and start writing your inciting incident scene. And there are other examples that are kind of broader in a sense for types of inciting incidents. This is from a different article on Masterclass, actually, called What is the Purpose of an Inciting Incident and Types of Inciting Incidents. And they describe 3 types, which are casual inciting actions involving a deliberate choice made either by the protagonist or about the protagonist, and this choice then informs all story elements to come. The next is coincidental inciting actions, which stem from random chance, coincidence, or a protagonist being in the right place at the right time. So that's mostly the case. And usually, like with any story, honestly, like the way you could sum it up is that it's a reluctant hero, that it's kind of like they're being not necessarily forced, but it's like they kind of have no choice but to go on this journey. And finally, number 3 is ambiguous inciting actions. Inciting actions that occur under circumstances that are not fully explained. The audience is left to guess whether the protagonist is placed in her situation by choice or by chance. Such inciting actions are common in thrillers and mysteries. An example they use is The Sixth Sense, where the true story is rarely revealed until the very end of the film. So we all know that movie and how it has such a huge place in pop culture because of the big twist at the end. So now to talk about creating a compelling inciting incident. These are tips from nownovel.com. So the first tip is give your inciting incident urgency. As was mentioned, time is a crucial element of setting and plot because the when of the story can add tension or constraint, yielding a greater need for development and or resolution. The next tip is raise questions for your reader. A great inciting incident leaves us with questions we want answered. So that's really especially true, I think, honestly, in novels, kind of leaving things open to interpretation all the more, and all the more like allowing you to explore within your own imagination if things are more open-ended. In movies, it's kind of, you can do that too, of course, you can do whatever you want in your story, but It's just in novels, it kind of, especially then when it's adapted into a movie, it kind of allows the audience to draw their own conclusions. And it lists also 2 examples saying you can explain a future event that we will then learn about the main character, and also a past event that has significance to the main character and something for them to remember at a future moment. And then we have these meaningful things that come up later on in the story. The next tip is use your inciting incident to illustrate key aspects of your character. The inciting incident in a novel is a good point to begin illustrating key facts about characters. How your character reacts to the inciting event gives us an idea of their personality, their values, goals, strengths, or weaknesses. Number 4 is sets the tone for your story. The best inciting incidents sets the story's tone. They give us indications of mood and atmosphere. And so that's with any given genre, of course, with romance, the lovey-dovey cute stuff, with thrillers or with horror, all of the scary stuff, or psychological thriller, or with dramas, the dramatic, emotional stuff, or the slice of life, the kind of coming of age things that the character will go through. And so really establishing all of these things early on is what is extremely crucial for any given story. Number 5 is know where in the story your inciting incident occurs. The inciting incident has to take place in the first act. This is non-negotiable. It is the catalyst that sets the rest of your story in motion. If it does not occur in the first act, your story might be structurally confusing. It might meander aimlessly if you find that what you think of as the inciting moment falls later in the story. So examine your first act, i.e. your first 3 chapters, and see if you can identify an inciting event there. If you do not find one, you need to stop and consider which story you want to tell and which inciting incident you want to work from. Is there none? You need to rework the first act of your novel so you establish key points of cause and effect sooner. An inciting incident can happen almost anywhere in the first act. For the most part, sooner is better than later. An early instance gets the attention of your readers and creates a narrative drive that makes them want to read more. So, if this popped into my head, the inciting incident in The Catcher in the Rye is when Holden gets kicked out of school, and then he's just on this journey of now he's meandering through New York City. He doesn't want to tell his parents. He just is, the whole thing about phonies and, oh, Holden. So, of him not wanting to grow up, etc., etc. You could pull any example, really, but that's just like ones that are coming to me off the top of my head. And so number 6 is develop your inciting incident. Now that you understand the inciting incident definition and have read some examples, let's examine how to develop it. To review, here are 3 points to keep in mind about the inciting incident. It happens in the first act, it happens to the protagonist, and the protagonist is usually passive at this juncture. The inciting incident is generally set in motion by someone or something else. For instance, a letter, a visit, an encounter. So, these are questions to ask yourself. How could the inciting incident affect characters? Is their response fear and the need for survival, desire, or another emotion? What additional questions may the reader have as a result of it? What tensions or conflicts might arise from the inciting incident, creating additional drama and contrast? And so, that's just kind of things to ask yourself whether you're writing, again, a short story, a play, a book, a TV show, a movie, etc., etc. And, it's something that, again, even though this kind of could be traced to, but then, it's a formula, but it's necessary for any given story. Otherwise, it's just, if you don't have an inciting incident, then this is just kind of a series of events that are kind of mundane and don't have any stakes, and then it's not really a journey for the main character and thus for the reader or the viewer, for the audience. So those are all just things to consider when writing in general and when you're thinking about the inciting incident. And there are times where I myself, when writing, have gotten confused and then realizing, oh wait, this isn't the moment that starts the story, this is the moment. So it is kind of, sometimes you need to kind of go back and really, if anything, even just get advice from someone who perhaps has more experience, whether it's your teacher or a mentor or even just someone that has more experience with screenwriting or whatever it is you're working on with just writing fiction, anything at all, and just kind of seeing, well, how can I structurally frame this? And it always goes back to, again, the characters want what it is they want, so then thus what is the journey they're going to go on in this story. And so, again, just taking into account the protagonist and what is the moment that kind of offsets them and disrupts the status quo. And that will then puts them into the main action of the story. And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. As always, be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com for all places to listen and to contact me, send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts, and to follow on social media. Next week, I've been wanting to discuss it. When I talked about Coco, I brought this up. I will be discussing Soul. I'm really excited to watch it. I just know it's going to be a really wonderful Pixar movie. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.